Welcome back to the Road to Wellbeing podcast series by Wellness360, where we have real conversations about what it takes to build a healthier, happier workplace. I'm Samantha Levin, the Wellness Program Manager here at Wellness360, and I'm so glad you're joining us today. On today's episode, we're diving into something we honestly don't talk about enough: what we're drinking at work. Coffee, tea, energy drinks. Most of us run on them without a second thought. But what if those everyday choices are contributing to fatigue, poor sleep, digestive issues, and stress? And what if the solution has been around for centuries? Today, I'm joined by Sivakumar, VP founder of WelloSip, a company bringing traditional herbal Indian drinks into modern corporate wellness. With over 15 years in health insurance, he has seen firsthand what poor beverage habits are costing employees and organizations alike. Welcome to Road to Wellbeing. So, before we dive into all of it, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you into founding WellowSip?
Yeah, good. This is Sivakumar. I'm a founder of WellowSip Designers Private Limited, based out of Bangalore, India. And let's say my profession started almost 30 years before, and last 15 years I was in uh, employee well-being and insurance, health insurance, etc. During this time, I had an opportunity to work closely with organizations and observe trends in employee well-being. What stood out to me was the many health challenges were not necessarily caused by lack of healthcare. It were often linked to everyday lifestyle habits like poor sleep, uh, continuous stress, and digestive discomfort, irregular eating habits, and growing dependence on stimulants to get through that particular day. That observation led me to explore a simple question: what if workplace wellness started with everyday ritual rather than intervention? Now, growing up in India, traditional herbal beverages were part of daily life and they were not consumed as medicines. It is a ritual that we follow on everyday basis. And over a period of time, that has helped me personally. Hence, I thought that this could be a good opportunity, or this could be a good uh, way to educate the people on the ritual beverage, I mean, ritual daily rituals, rather than getting into a medication or symptom based interventions. So that has made me to bring WellowSip into light, and we are operating for last 6 years. We are operating, but effectively last 2 years it becomes a private limited company, and we are doing well this part of time. Yes.
Wonderful. That sounds like such a fascinating path, really going from being inside the system that responds to the health problems to actually trying to prevent them at the source. I think what makes your story really unique is that you were, not guessing something was wrong. You were literally seeing it, in the real data, the real claims from real employees. It sounds like the insurance world handed you the what, and then you spent the next chapter, figuring out the why and how. And that's such a powerful place to build something from. So really, you spent, I guess, 15 years in the health insurance, working with corporate clients. You were literally looking at employee health claims, close up. What patterns were you noticing that most employees were completely ignoring?
Say, one recurring pattern was the organization focus heavily on treatment or healthcare benefits or insurance claims, but far less on daily habits that influence well-being. Now, employees are experiencing fatigue, stress, uh, sleep challenges, digestive discomfort, burnout. Yet, many of the underlying lifestyle contributors remain unaddressed. And another interesting observation was the workplace beverage culture rarely entered the well-being discussion. Companies would invest in wellness programs, but employees were still consuming multi cups of sugary beverages or coffee or energy drinks throughout the day. When we talk about workplace well-being, what people drink every day deserves a place in that conversation. So this is what my observation over a period of time. But of course, we will discuss as we move forward.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That really resonates with me. From a wellness standpoint, we see, same thing all the time, companies investing heavily in, the benefits package, but no one is paying close, attention to what is actually in the back room or what people are actually consuming every single day. And, the numbers, these back it up, right? Nearly 60% of, US workers say that they feel burnt out. And yet the conversation around prevention is still way behind the conversation about treatment. It's almost like we have completely isolated, food and drinks away from the wellness conversation when really what you put in your body every single day is the foundation of everything else. Your energy, your focus, your stress levels, all of it. I want to be real honest with you, our listeners. And, I was someone who, thought 3 cups of coffee a day was totally normal. It was fine. It was not until I started, working in wellness. And, that I actually stopped to ask myself, what is actually, going on behind the scenes. So, most of us don't think twice about grabbing a cup of coffee or an energy drink at work. It's just what we do, naturally. We'll reach for it. So, maybe tell us a little bit about why we should start thinking twice about, what we're reaching for at work.
Because what we consume repeatedly becomes part of our daily performance pattern.
Yeah.
And many people are drinking coffee because they enjoy every cup. They are drinking it because they feel they need it to keep going, to come out of their stress or to come out of their fatigue, or they would just want to have a break. So
Yeah.
that is the reason that these people are having coffee on a regular basis. But I believe that the question is not whether the coffee is good or bad.
Yeah.
The question is whether we are consuming it consciously or automatically. So when people start paying attention to their energy pattern, hydration level and sleep quality and recovery, they often discover that small change in beverage habits can have a meaningful impact on how they feel throughout the day. Now, when we are analyzing this particular thing, what is more important is generally people feel after lunch, they feel some sort of a sluggishness will be there, right? So these are all the small things which is happening on a everyday life, which we are ignoring it. In my opinion, these are all the symptoms. I mean, I can't tell symptoms. These are all the small issues that if we are able to address, we can contribute a very big way in the employee's health. That is my take.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Very fascinating. I know here in the US, the average American, like I kind of mentioned earlier, drinks about 3 cups of coffee a day. And most of this is happening at work. It's not about demonizing coffee. It's more about, the fact that 90% of Americans consume, high levels of caffeine daily, and most of us have never stopped to ask how it's actually making us feel. We just assume tired means more of it, that we need another cup of coffee, when really maybe we're tired because we didn't get enough sleep at night, or we're tired because we're actually feeling a little bit burnt out at work, right? I think everyone listening right now has lived this exact same cycle, and I know that there are days where we've had coffee when we wake up, or maybe after lunch, and then wondered, at midnight why we couldn't fall asleep. I know you kind of mentioned a little bit about, that cycle and, the crash that you feel in the afternoon, after maybe eating lunch and then you feel super sluggish. Maybe, if you don't mind talking about, what's actually happening to the body and why it's so hard to break that cycle, for most employees.
Sorry, can you repeat the question once again?
Yeah, yeah. If you don't mind maybe sharing a little bit about, why it's so hard to break this cycle and, what's actually happening to the body. So, most people at work, you mentioned, feel sluggish, especially in the afternoon. They'll drink coffee. Maybe, employees won't have breakfast in the morning. They'll just have, a cup of coffee and they'll feel super energized, but maybe their blood sugar is super low and then they'll eat lunch and then they'll have another cup of coffee because they're feeling super sluggish after lunch. Why is that cycle so hard to break? And, maybe a little bit about like what we can do to actually fix this cycle.
Right. Okay. So, it's not, as I told you previously, that coffee is not bad, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
are we taking caffeine can be useful tool that or when consumed mindfully. If you're anything that you're drinking, if you are mindful, if you know what you are taking, it is good. But however, many professionals operate in a cycle where they wake up tired and use caffeine to become alert
Yeah.
and experience an afternoon energy drip and then use more caffeine to compensate. So it is all cycle. So as long as you are having a good sleep, you will feel fresh and you may be able to do your job in a more effective way. But all these things is a cycle, right?
Yeah.
It is a connecting thing. Now, for some individuals, especially when they consume later in the day, caffeine may interfere with sleep quality or poor sleep then contribute to the next day fatigue, which can reinforce the cycle. The biggest conversation is not about eliminating caffeine, it's about helping people understand their own relationship with it and creating healthier alternative when needed. So the idea of what we are talking about is be cautious, be very clear what you are taking, and uh, watch yourself what is happening within you, so that if something is not going well um, with your body, probably you can avoid those things so that it will be better for that particular person. So each body is different and each a person is different. So whatever is working for one person, the other person for the other person it may not be the same. But what we are telling is be cautious. Um, watch your day, watch your drinks, watch your food. As long as if you are able to do this one, then probably we'll be in a better position.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved what you said there, helping people understand their own relationships and creating healthy behaviors, that's important. And, like you mentioned, everyone is different and every single individual, their needs are different. It's really, about teaching them, So kind of what I just heard is, that cycle is almost reinforcing, the more tired you are, the more you reach for caffeine. And, we don't want to, penalize individuals. And it's not completely bad, but caffeine, does disrupt your sleep. And the more you drink, the more you feel exhausted, you'll wake up the next morning and it's not a willpower problem. It's almost like biological. We're just, just reaching for it out of nature. The body just responds to, what we keep giving it. This is, kind of where I would love for you to, tap in a little bit, so where do, traditional herbal drinks come in and why did you specifically look into those roots, when thinking about a solution? This is something I find really exciting because in the wellness space, we talk a lot about innovation, right? But sometimes the most powerful solution are the ones that we have just been quietly working on for centuries, kind of, what you're really doing and what you're, in that space for. And, we're only now catching up to them. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about, those roots and this solution that you've created at WellowSip.
Yeah, great. So all over the world, we are having a tradition, and each tradition depends on the country, depends on the climate, the practices varies. But overall, there were traditional practice exists all over the world. Now, in India, the traditional culture always recognize the importance of daily rituals. It is not happen. It is not happen when there is a some sort of a illness or some sickness. We have this one. It is a daily ritual on a everyday basis. We have this particular practice, but over a period of last 30 years, we have forgotten this particular practice. Uh, when I talk about my thing, I've practiced from my childhood days. Because of that, I can talk with certain authority here. So across India, the herbal infusions made from ingredients such as normal kitchen ingredients like ginger, turmeric, tulsi, or I mean, tulsi probably in India they know, but in US it is basil, holy basil they call it as, and there are a lot of spices added along with this one.
Mhm.
One thing which we are very clear about is nothing is perfect. We believe that nothing is perfect. I mean, the God has created in such a fashion. So anything that we are doing, it should be a combination. It should be a well protected infusion is what we have to make. In that particular thing, it is a tradition that the households have this routine on generations. It has been practiced over generations. What fascinating me was that these practices were designed around balance and seasonalities. Uh, when I mean seasonalities, it varies from place to place. But having said that one, most of the ingredients are almost the same, only the recipes changes here and there. At WelloSip, we are simply modernizing the wisdom in the format that fits contemporary lifestyle and workplace. Our goal is not to replace modern choice, it is to expand them.
Yeah.
So effectively what we are trying to do is we are just want to give one more option for the people who wants to come out of uh, what they feel that it is not right for them. So everybody have their own choice. I just want to give one extra choice to them, telling that try it out.
Yeah.
When you're trying it out, probably you may feel that whatever the present stress or thing, you may feel that you are coming out of it or you feel something calm, etc. So as I told you previously that for each and every person, the experience is completely different. So having said that one, we like to add this particular added advantage. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I really do love that. So what I'm hearing is that, it's really less about, you know, about replacing what people already do and more about, just expanding their options, right? If someone loves something, we don't want to completely take it away or penalize them. Making the healthier choice, feels just as easy as, and accessible as grabbing a cup of coffee, right? And that is such a smart approach from a change management perspective. There's something really powerful about the idea that traditional practices have had this figured out long before energy drinks were even a thing. And what's really interesting is that in the US right now, there's a massive shift happening. The functional, beverage market here is worth over $50 billion and it's growing fast. Everything from, mushroom coffee, matcha, kombucha, people are actively searching for these alternatives. And they just do not always know what works for them or, the real tradition behind it. So what you're offering really is exactly that, backed by centuries for, actual knowledge, not just clever marketing. And I love that you're really asking people, to not completely overhaul, their lifestyle or what they're actually, already doing, but just offering them a solution that, can fit with what they're already doing. And I think that is super important for employees when they're making this switch and adding this alternative into that workplace, really just one last question I also have for you, and I love this one because it really gives us that real global perspective from where you sit. How do workplace beverages habits differ between India and the US, and what do you think each can learn from each other?
Yeah, see, I may not be able to comment on US because I don't
No,
have.
I got the US.
Yeah, so that I leave it to you. But what I can talk about is in India, because in India, it is a rich heritage of herbal wellness tradition, but modern urban lifestyle are increasingly adopting high caffeine and convenience-driven uh, consumption pattern, mostly of sugary beverages.
Yeah.
Uh, India can learn from a structured implementation of workplace or well-being program. But having said that one, I like to hear from your side how US is working on this because typically speaking, beyond India, I can't talk. So I just want to take your opinion on how US is working.
Yeah, yeah. From what I see on the US side, the functional beverage market is really booming, kind of like I mentioned earlier, at $50 billion and growing. So the openness to alternative, solutions is there. What I think we're missing is the prevention mindset. It's just, throwing solutions out there. In the US, health culture is largely reactive, but we wait until, something is wrong to try and fix it. The idea of building small daily rituals that keep you balanced, before problems ever show up is not something most Americans, in the workplace have really figured out. That's why I really, love this conversation. And there is something about, warmth and intentionality that, the Indian beverage culture has that the US has really lost. Here everything is iced on the go in paper cups while you are already doing, three other things, right? So a lot of multitasking going on here. The average American spends over $1,000 a year on coffee, and most of us would say we barely even taste it. It's just, fuel. When you were describing what you are describing is the complete opposite of that. A lot of times, I made probably a cup of coffee and half of it is even milk and not really just a lot of that, caffeine anyways. I think, in the US has that infrastructure, the innovation and, that appetite for change. And, that, in India has had the centuries of wisdom about, what actually works for the body. And, WelloSip feels exactly like that bridge between, two of those worlds. And I think that is extremely important. And, when I did hear your story and what you do offer, I think would be, truly wonderful to have, in these workplaces, in these offices for, many Americans to reach for and grab. I think there's so many different alternatives to caffeine here. But it's really just starting out, what do you like? What works best for the individual? Because, I think it's a lot of overload also here. There's so many alternatives that it almost becomes overwhelming. And you're like, what is actually the best alternative for me? Um, so that's kind of a little bit, a shift. And, I want to be honest, I came into this conversation as a coffee person. And I think, after leaving this conversation is something I, seriously need to consider when I reach for that afternoon cup. And, that says a lot, that's really important. And that mindset shift, of course. Um, this has really been an eye-opening conversation, and I thank you a lot. And I think people are really going to listen to this and look at their morning cup of coffee maybe a little bit differently, or maybe they'll, start to add in those alternative drinks into their day instead of that afternoon cup, right? I think this is a good thing. It's a really good conversation. So I thank you for joining us for today's episode on Road to Wellbeing. Is there anything else that you would love to add to the space?
See, I didn't have much to talk on this. And first of all, let me thank Wellness360 and yourself for giving this opportunity to discuss about wellness, so that at least this is one of the perspective that we are trying to bring it in this particular scenario. And let us see how we can change the wellness or the corporate wellness. So rather than if I want to talk about a last message, I would like to listen to takeaway. It is workplace wellness is not built only through policies, benefits, or annual wellness initiatives. It is built through everyday choice and rituals. Sometimes the journey towards better well-being starts with something as simple as pausing, reflecting, and being more intentional about what we drink each day. If you are conscious on what we do, what we eat, have some sort of a limitation on digital media, etc., probably we'll be in a better position. Say, whether it is US or India, we are talking about human, we are talking about the practices that is available, and these practices are there for more than 2000, 3000 years. So it is not a simple practice, and it is a proven thing. And what we are using is all normal ingredients. It is all botanical things that we are talking about. So having said this one, I welcome corporates who, if at all, if they want to change, it is preferable that if they are able to change on the daily rituals, it will give much more benefit than spending their entire budget on one single wellness day or wellness program. So that is my message that I want to give it here. Thanks, Samantha, for giving the opportunity, and thanks once again for Wellness360 also.
Yes, thank you. And that was a wonderful, last key takeaway. I really appreciate, you kind of mentioning that. And thank you to everyone listening. Thank you for tuning in. Again, if today's episode resonated with you, share it to a colleague, a friend, or your HR team. Small habits, big impact. We'll see you on the next episode of Road to Wellbeing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.